Wanted to break down XLK stock, which of course is the Spider Select Sector ETF for the technology sector. Technology, of course, is a pretty hot topic for the U.S. economy. These stocks tend to outperform SPY stock. SPY stock, of course, is the select sector, the Spider Select Sector ETF for all 500 stocks, but there's 11 sectors. XLK stock is one of those sectors. So there's about 65 stocks in XLK of that 500. What's going on with technology sector, XLK stock? Let's jump in and I'll show you some of the things that I'm looking at to show you this one's a little overpriced and we may see some pullback. Jumping right in, what we're looking at is actually SPY stock, the bar chart, versus XLK stock, the technology sector. And as you can see, there are times when XLK stock underperforms SPY stock or the S&P 500, broadly speaking, and then sometimes it outperforms it. It's a pretty significant outperformance right now, about 20% from, say, mid-year last year. Now, I've looked at this 6 ways to Sunday, and I asked the question, how can I take advantage of this? And I keep staring at it and playing with options and things like this. And what I'm thinking is the best way to maybe play this is to figure out a long position for SPY stock, selling short XLK stock to the point where at some point they meet up, then I take profits. Because I don't see that this margin here, the plus 27 for SPY stock and the plus 46% for XLK stock, widening too much further. I keep looking at this and I keep trying to put together some scenarios. I keep playing it, looking at 3-month options, 1-month options, 1-week options, credit spreads. I've looked at it various ways. But fundamentally, I believe XLK stock is overpriced relative to other investments, and that despite the fact that we're probably going to see an economy that continues to expand, which would push SPY stock higher, XLK stock will have to come back down to reality at some point. But you also need to break down what's going on with each individual stock. And in this, what I did was I took a look at, now there's about 65 stocks in here, and unfortunately, screen size, I can't put all 65, but I got pretty darn close. Here we're looking right at the middle, and wouldn't you know it, number 32, Apple. AAPL is the symbol there. Apple stock, of course, one of the biggest stocks on planet Earth, yielding only 3.688%. That's key. 50% of the stocks in XLK stock, of course, are yielding more than Apple, and 50% are yielding less than Apple. That does not mean that those stocks, the ones that are yielding more than, would necessarily rise, shrinking the yield, or vice versa for those yields that are yielding less. And I wanted to break that down because that kind of gives a grasp of what's going on within XLK stock, and should you be wanting to trade that, that's what you want to look at. Again, I'm not necessarily going to call XLK stock moving upward or downward as much as I'm going to say SPY stock and XLK stock will merge on a percentage basis, that original chart I just showed you. And the way for me to play that, and I keep tweaking this and I'm going to keep looking at it further and further, is to sell XLK stock in some manner, buying SPY stock with the idea that at some point you see a merge in their percentage gain. And from there, I can take profits. I'll probably take a loss on one, sure, taking a profit on the other, which would outpace my loss. And that's what I'm looking to kind of put together. But in the meantime, Apple stock is your midpoint. Let's take a look at some of the higher yielding stocks. HPQ, Hewlett Packard Compaq, COMPAQ was the former company there. Forward earnings per share 3.46. The stock price trading at 29 bucks. Here's the thing, you're getting about a 4% yield out of the dividend alone from HP. This is a high yielder relative to future earnings per share. I don't see HPQ kind of moving higher. This breakdown that I have, it's the remaining stocks in there. You can see Apple all the way down there. This, of course, 11% is pretty high, but let's look at the bottom of the list. And unfortunately, there's like 2 or 3 stocks you can't see above Broadcom until you get to that midpoint. The overall yield for XLK stock is 2.96%. Remember, Apple was the midpoint at 3.6%. The U.S. 10-year Treasury, your benchmark investment rate, is 4.3% right now today. So 2.96% is a little bit low, relatively speaking. But if we look at Micron Technology all the way down at the bottom, that's one that really is kind of interesting because it's 2 cents is your earnings per share for the next 4 quarters. I'm going to break down Micron Technology because that one, when you look at that, that's sort of a misnomer. So they've taken a hit, but expect profits to come back in 2025. Micron Technology stock, MU, the ticker symbol. And here we're actually looking at MU stock in orange versus the S&P 500. And as you can see, there is some growth there. It has underperformed the S&P 500, SPY stock, of course, but not quite as dramatic as some of the other things. Here is a look at projected revenues for Micron Technologies, MU being the symbol. They're going to get back to trend line in 2025. Projected earnings per share, $6.52. If you annualize that over the next 2 years, it's about 3%, 3.5% your first year, 4% the second year. It's not a terrible yield. That's why Micron Technology stock, MU, is trading as high as it is because people are looking forward into 2025. To look at the loss for 2024 expectations, that's discounting all the information. 3.5%, 4% on a cumulative basis over the next 2 years for $6.52. It's not terrible at all. In fact, it outperforms at 7%, 7.5%, pushing 8%, versus the 4.3% cumulatively over the next 2 years for the U.S. 10-year Treasury. This would slightly outperform the U.S. 10-year Treasury at 7.5%. Apple stock. We're looking at Apple stock, which has underperformed SPY stock, the XLK stock. And as you can see, the Apple stock is up 17% from this midpoint, whereas XLK stock itself, 48% increase. So there's about a 31% sort of gap between the two. Here's a look at projected revenues. 2024, Apple is expected to see increasing revenues, but not by a whole bunch. But then 2025, they're expected to see a further increase. Then we look at Apple's projected earnings per share, $6.57 for this year, 2025, $7.18. This particular stock, when you consider that, it's a little overpriced, especially relative to some of the other stocks within XLK stock, the technology sector. Finally, wanted to take a look at HPQ versus, this is XLK stock, is the bar chart. HPQ is the orange line there, negative 14%. You're getting almost nothing, but you're still getting about 4% yield from the dividends alone. That's interesting, but it's not enough to drive HP stock higher. And if you look at projected revenues, sure, revenues are expected to move a little bit higher, but not by a whole bunch. There are stocks that will easily outperform revenue gains versus HP. And then, of course, projected earnings per share, incrementally higher, but not nearly as much as some of the other companies that you could be investing in. So HP stock itself, generally speaking, despite the fact that it is high yielding, it's fallen out of favor. They're not expecting much revenue growth, therefore not much in way of, you are getting earnings growth, which would give you yield. Still, however, the dividend. Now, I wouldn't be jumping into HP myself because I'm always looking for stocks that are increasing revenue themselves on a basis that outperforms the S&P 500. HP certainly doesn't do that. They have taken a loss. We are seeing projected earnings per share increasing, but there are better performing stocks out there. Still, 4% dividend. That's interesting. And yet, the stock itself growth rate is negative over the past year and a half. I wanted to take a look at XLK stock, the technology sector in the orange bar here, versus the S&P 500. Mostly speaking, these stocks inside XLK are a bit overpriced. And you can see that played out versus S&P 500. What I'm trying to do is figure out a strategy where I can sell XLK stock and buy the S&P 500 on a ratio basis that makes sense, where I can take in enough profit once these two merge with their percentage growth rates. And that's what I'm really trying to do. Would I buy XLK stock outright? Probably not. Overvalued, overpriced, I should say. S&P 500 itself, I expect the S&P 500 SPY stock to continue to move higher given the current economic environment. But the Federal Reserve could change that real fast if they start getting frustrated with inflation. We just got an inflation report earlier this week that showed that the decline in inflation, the year-over-year growth rate, may not be enough for the Federal Reserve's appetite. We'll see how that plays out. We have a meeting with those guys in March. In the meantime, if this is the kind of content you're looking for, thanks so much. Make sure to hit that like and follow button. Thanks for the great comments. See you in the next video.